They said the foal wouldn't live to see the sunrise. In the billion-dollar shadows of a world-class racing stable, a newborn filly entered the world not to the sound of celebration, but to a cold, hard silence. She was born blind, a flaw, a defect, dismissed as worthless before her legs were even steady enough to stand. A single command from her powerful, wealthy owner sealed her fate. Get rid of it. But fate, as it turns out, doesn't take orders. On the edge of a forgotten desert town, a battle-scarred veteran with nothing left in the world but his ghosts was about to stumble upon a trembling, discarded life in the dark. He would make a choice that would defy a cruel billionaire, ignite a community, and change not just 2 lives, but thousands, forever. This is a story about what we throw away and what is truly priceless. Before we get into it, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. And if you believe in second chances, make sure you hit that subscribe button. You're not going to want to miss a second of this. The Langston racing empire never truly slept. It was a kingdom built on speed and perfection doesn't take nights off. Even after the sun bled out behind the Arizona mountains, the long, immaculate barns glowed under the hum of expensive sodium lamps. The air, thick with the smell of sweet hay, expensive leather, and the raw power of million-dollar animals, was the smell of money. Outside, the wind whispered over manicured training tracks and paddocks greener than an Irish dream. But tonight, in the heart of the empire, the state-of-the-art foaling barn, a different scent tainted the air. It was sharp, metallic, and warm, the smell of new blood. Trevor Langston moved through his kingdom like a king surveying his domain. His boots, hand-stitched from Italian leather, made a slow, deliberate sound on the swept concrete aisle. The echo was the only sound that dared to be loud in his presence. He was a man carved from ambition and impatience, his face tanned from afternoons spent in the owner's box, his hair still more black than gray. At 45, Trevor Langston had never known a day of want, and he'd never accepted a second-place ribbon in his life. Horses, to him, were not creatures of beauty or spirit. They were assets. High-performance, biological machines engineered for one purpose, to cross the finish line first. If they couldn't run, they didn't matter. Stable hands, who were polishing brass and mucking out stalls, went silent as he passed. They knew the rules. You didn't speak unless spoken to. You didn't make eye contact unless invited. Trevor Langston didn't just own the horses. He owned their mortgages, their kids' tuition, their futures. At the very end of the aisle, a single stall door stood open. The air grew thicker with the scent of birth and exhaustion. Inside, a magnificent mare, a champion herself, lay on her side in a deep bed of golden straw. Her dark coat was slick with sweat, her sides quivering with the aftershocks of a long, hard labor. And beside her, a tiny, fragile shape trembled on legs that looked like they were made of twigs. The newborn foal's coat was a pale, smoky gray, still damp and slick. It tried to stand, its spindly legs buckling and sliding in the straw. It let out a tiny, uncertain whinny, a sound so soft it was almost swallowed by the cavernous barn. Miguel, the night groom, was crouched beside the foal, his hand steadying its fragile body. He was an old hand, with eyes that had seen hundreds of births, and he knew, even before he ran the tests, that something was terribly, fundamentally wrong. The foal's ears swiveled perfectly, tracking every sound. But its eyes were clouded, milky, and completely unfocused. They stared right through him, seeing nothing. He waved a hand slowly in front of its face. No reaction, not even a blink. He snapped his fingers, a crisp, sharp sound right beside its muzzle. The foal flinched at the noise, but its eyes remained vacant. A heavy silence fell over the stall. Miguel's stomach twisted into a cold, hard knot. He'd worked for Langston for 15 years. He knew exactly what this meant. Trevor Langston's shadow fell over them as he stepped into the stall. He didn't kneel. He didn't offer a word of comfort to the exhausted mare. He simply stood there, his cold eyes assessing the situation like an auditor finding a discrepancy in the books. The trembling colt, the tired mother, the grim look on Miguel's face. How bad? His voice was flat, emotionless, like he was asking for a weather report. Miguel swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. He kept his eyes fixed on the straw at his feet. Born blind, sir. I'm certain of it. A muscle in Trevor's jaw twitched, just once. It was the only sign of any emotion at all. He looked at the beautiful, flawed little creature, this broken asset, and delivered his verdict in the same tone he'd used to reject a damaged shipment of feed. Get rid of it. He didn't elaborate. He didn't have to. Everyone in his employ knew what get rid of it meant. It meant a quick, quiet trip to the back of the property. A single, muffled sound. A problem erased. We don't keep defects, he added, turning his back on the scene. The mare, as if she understood the finality in his voice, let out a low, protective nicker. She stretched her neck, nudging her blind baby, trying to shield it with her own body. The foal, completely unaware of the death sentence that had just been passed, wobbled and leaned into its mother's warmth, its only comfort in a world of darkness. Miguel didn't look up. Yes, sir? Trevor was already halfway down the aisle, his voice now crisp and businesslike as he spoke to an assistant on his phone about a stallion he was scouting in Kentucky. The sound of his expensive boots faded, leaving behind a silence that was heavier than any sound. Miguel stayed crouched in the straw for a long time. He watched the little foal try and fail to find its footing, its knobby knees trembling with effort. Its legs were so thin, so fragile. And yet, it kept trying. It wanted to live. A memory surfaced, unbidden, from a childhood spent in a dusty village in Sonora. He was 8 years old, hiding a stray dog with a shattered leg under his porch. His father's voice booming and angry. We don't waste food on broken things. You feed that dog, you don't eat. He'd fed the dog anyway, sneaking its scraps from his own plate. He'd fed it until it was strong enough to limp along beside him, its loyal shadow. Now, in this palace of a barn, surrounded by wealth and perfection, he felt that same stubborn ache in his chest. A blind foal couldn't survive in the wild. Even in a paddock, it was a danger to itself. Langston's logic was cold, but it was practical. It was the logic of a businessman. But Miguel wasn't a businessman. He was a horseman, and getting rid of this foal in the way Langston meant felt like a sin. It felt like putting out a light before it had ever had a chance to shine. The foal shifted, pressing its small, warm body against Miguel's hand, seeking balance, seeking comfort. He took a deep breath. Langston's mind was a closed door. There was no changing it. The only choice left was how he was going to disobey the order. He glanced down the long, empty aisle. The other hands were busy or pretending to be. No one wanted to be a witness to this. He moved quickly to the tack room and grabbed an old, thick wool blanket from a hook. Easy now, pequeño, he murmured, his voice a low whisper meant only for the foal. We're going for a little ride. He wrapped the blanket gently but firmly around the foal's small body, lifting it into his arms. It was shockingly light, as fragile as a bird. The foal gave a tiny, hiccuping protest, but then settled against his chest, calmed by his warmth. Sticking to the shadows, Miguel moved like a ghost out of the barn and toward the employee parking lot at the far end of the property. His old pickup truck, its red paint faded to a dull rust by the relentless sun, waited for him. He gently placed the bundled foal on the passenger seat, where it lay still, its head turning slightly as the truck door creaked shut. The engine coughed, then roared to life, the sound shockingly loud in the sleeping compound. Miguel flinched, expecting a shout, a light to flick on. But nothing happened. He was clear. He drove without headlights, navigating by the faint glow of the moon, down a dusty service road and out the rear gate of the Langston Empire. He was leaving the world of perfection and heading into the vast, unforgiving desert. The night air was sharp and cold, and the sky was a black velvet blanket scattered with diamond dust stars. He drove for nearly an hour, deeper and deeper into the scrubland where the paved roads gave way to dirt, and the dirt gave way to sand. He finally pulled over in a place where no one ever came, a flat, desolate stretch of earth dotted with creosote bushes and skeletal Joshua trees. He killed the engine. The silence that rushed in was absolute. He sat there for a long moment, his hands gripping the steering wheel. The thought was a weak, flimsy thing, but it was the only one he had. If I leave it here, maybe someone will find it. Maybe a coyote won't. Maybe. It was a coward's hope, and he knew it. But taking it back was impossible. And doing the job himself, he couldn't. He got out of the truck and lifted the foal one last time. It was awake, its head turning toward the sound of his breathing. The wind was sharper here, cutting through his thin jacket. Miguel walked a few dozen paces into the scrub and gently set the foal down. Its spindly legs unfolded, and it stood there, swaying, its nose lifting to scent the strange, wild air. Its ears swiveled, catching every whisper of the wind, every skittering sound in the dark. But its clouded eyes saw nothing. It let out a small, strangled whinny. A question. Where are we? Where did Mother go? Miguel's throat tightened. Lo siento, pequeño. I'm sorry, little one. He backed away slowly. The foal's head jerked toward the sound of his retreating footsteps. It took a wobbly, hesitant step after him, its tiny hooves sinking into the soft sand. Then another. Miguel's jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. He spun around and walked quickly, almost running back to the truck. He didn't look back. He couldn't. He slammed the door, the sound echoing in the vast emptiness. He cranked the engine, the roar filling the cold air. The headlights flared to life, sweeping for a brief, brutal second across the pale, unsteady, utterly alone figure in the scrub. Then he wrenched the wheel, the tires spitting gravel, and drove away, leaving the blind foal in a world of absolute darkness. As the sound of the truck faded, only the wind remained, and the faint, questioning cries of a creature that had never seen the world it had just been abandoned in. And what no one knew, not the billionaire owner, not the heartbroken groom, was that this one act of cruelty, and this one act of defiance, had just set in motion a chain of events that would shake an entire industry to its core. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning. The old GMC Sierra looked like it had been hammered together from spare parts and stubbornness. Its forest green paint was mostly a memory, surrendered to decades of Arizona sun, leaving behind patches of primer and rust that told a long, hard story. It was parked on a scrubby patch of dirt on the outskirts of Benson, a town where the desert was always trying to reclaim what was hers. From a folding camp chair on his makeshift porch, Hank Cooper watched the world go by. Or rather, he watched it not go by. At 58, Hank was the kind of man who had become invisible. His beard was a salt and pepper scrub, his face was shadowed by a faded ball cap, but the lines around his eyes were etched deep, carved by years of squinting into a sun much harsher than this one. He was a veteran, a scavenger, a ghost. Shrapnel from his last tour in Afghanistan had left his shoulder with a permanent nagging ache, and his mind with a silence he preferred not to break. He made his living from the things other people threw away. Scrap metal, broken appliances, discarded furniture. He collected, he repaired, he survived. It was a quiet life, and quiet suited him just fine. That night, the wind had a knife's edge to it. Hank pulled his jacket tighter and drove the old Sierra toward the municipal dump. The sky was a starless, hazy sheet of gray. The moon was a dull smudge. He worked the complaining chain-link gate open and stepped inside, a burlap sack slung over his shoulder. The sounds were familiar. The rattle of loose sheet metal, the hiss of wind through dry tumbleweeds. He was bent over, prying a length of copper pipe from a busted water heater when he heard it. A sound so faint, so high and thin, he almost missed it. It wasn't a coyote. It wasn't a stray cat. It was a sound of pure, helpless distress. It came in short, quavering bursts, as if the creature making it was running out of air, running out of hope. Hank froze. He tilted his head, his breath held tight in his chest. There it was again. Weaker this time. He dropped the pipe. It clanged against the concrete, the sound swallowed by the wind. All the slow, methodical patience of the scavenger vanished, replaced by the sharp, focused alertness of a soldier on patrol. His body went rigid, his senses firing on all cylinders. He knew that sound. It was the sound of something small and alive, and in trouble. He moved toward the noise, his boots crunching softly on the gravel. He didn't use his flashlight yet. His ears, trained to pick out the snap of a tripwire from the rustle of leaves, were all he needed. The sound led him past the sagging fence line into a tangle of prickly pear cactus and sharp-leafed yucca plants. The sound came again, longer this time, a desperate, trembling call. He switched on his flashlight. The yellow beam cut a shaky path through the darkness. It slid over broken glass, discarded tires, and then it caught movement. In a shallow depression hidden by a clump of dried grass, something was shivering. He approached slowly, his heart thumping a steady, heavy rhythm against his ribs. The light spilled over a small, gray body, folded in on itself. 4 impossibly thin legs were tucked beneath it. Its knees were raw and bloody. Its beautiful, smoky coat was matted with dirt and sand. And its eyes, large and cloudy, stared past the beam of his flashlight without seeing it. A foal. A blind foal. A jolt went through Hank, so powerful it was like touching a live wire. It cut through the layers of numbness he'd built up for years. He crouched down, his boots sinking into the soft sand. He could feel the desperate tremors running through the little body. Its breathing was shallow, each exhale a tiny puff of steam in the cold night air. He reached out a calloused, steady hand and laid it gently on the foal's neck. "Easy there, kid," he murmured, his voice low and rough but calm. "I'm not gonna hurt you." The foal flinched, but then, amazingly, it tilted its head toward the sound of his voice. Its gaze remained fixed on nothing, but its entire body seemed to be listening. Blind. The word hit Hank like a punch to the gut. Someone had done this. Someone had brought this perfect, helpless creature out here and left it to die. A cold, hard rage, an emotion he hadn't felt in a very long time, began to smolder deep in his gut. He stayed there for a long moment, his hand resting on the foal's shoulder, feeling the fragile bones, the frantic, terrified heartbeat beneath his palm. An old instinct kicked in, the same instinct that had made him scoop up a 3-legged dog as a boy, the same instinct that had made him crawl under heavy fire to drag a bleeding Marine to safety. You see something helpless, you get it out. That's the mission, that's the only mission that matters. "All right," he said softly, as if making a pact. "Let's get you out of here." He went back to the truck, dug an old olive-drab wool blanket from his toolbox, a blanket that had been with him through 2 tours, and spread it on the sand. He gently slid his arms under the foal, one under its chest, the other under its hindquarters, and lifted. The foal let out a weak, protesting cry, its legs flailing for a second before it settled against his chest. "Gotcha," Hank said, holding it tight. It was so light, all sharp angles and trembling warmth. He carried it back to the truck, his steps careful and sure in the dark. He placed the foal on the passenger seat, wrapping the blanket snugly around it. It let out a low, questioning nicker and turned its face toward him, its nose bumping his arm. Hank sat in the driver's seat and looked at the small, swaddled creature beside him. He looked at it for a long, quiet moment, the way you look at something you know is about to change everything. even if you don't know how. A name came to him, unbidden, a story an old buddy used to tell on long nights overseas, about the stars they used to navigate by when all the equipment failed, the points of light you look for when you're completely lost in the dark. Astra, he whispered, the name feeling right in his mouth. That's you, my light in the dark. He started the old Sierra. The engine coughed, then rumbled to life. The headlights cut a pale tunnel through the darkness as he steered the truck back toward the road, back toward the faint glow of town. Behind them, the desert wind swept over the empty hollow in the sand. But the night was different now. The small, desperate voice was gone. It was safe in the cab of an old truck, wrapped in a soldier's blanket, heading toward a future no one could have predicted. Hank didn't know it yet, but he hadn't just rescued a foal. He had just picked a fight with a very powerful, very ruthless man. And that fight was heading right for his front door. Hank's home was a camper shell bolted to the back of the Sierra, a makeshift shelter that leaned against the desert wind. Inside, the dim yellow light of an oil lamp cast flickering shadows on plywood walls. It smelled of kerosene and the dry, sweet scent of old hay. He made a bed for the foal in the corner, a nest of clean straw on top of his old army blanket. He set her down gently. The pale, clouded eyes blinked in his direction but didn't see him. The little body curled in on itself, trembling from the cold and the shock. The first challenge was food. She was a baby. She needed milk, and Hank had nothing. He walked a half-mile in the pre-dawn chill to the trailer of Marie Thompson, a woman who was 70 years old and knew everything that happened in Benson before it happened. He knocked. The door opened before his knuckles left the wood. "Lord, Hank, you look like you wrestled a ghost and lost." "Found something," he said, his voice hoarse. "Need a baby bottle." She squinted at him. "What kind of something?" "4 legs, blind. Won't eat hay." She didn't ask another question. She disappeared into her trailer and came back with a dusty baby bottle and a can of powdered infant formula. "You boil that bottle first," she ordered. "And don't you dare let it go sour." Back in the camper, Hank mixed the formula with warm water from his kettle. The smell was sweet and strange in his small Spartan home. He knelt beside the foal. "Astra," he said softly. "Time to eat." She sniffed at the bottle but turned her head away. She wanted her mother. This strange rubber thing was an insult. "I know it's not what you're used to," Hank said, his voice patient, "but it'll keep you on your feet." He gently cradled her, one arm supporting her chest, and brought the nipple to her lips again. She mouthed it, took a single, hesitant swallow, and then jerked her head away. He tried again, and again. Every 3 hours around the clock, he repeated the ritual. The warm milk, the quiet voice, the steady hands. For 2 days, it was a battle, a few sips, then refusal. Astra was getting weaker. Hank could feel the life in her starting to fade. He was tired, his own ghosts whispering in the corners of the camper during the long, cold nights. He started talking to her, the way he used to talk to the guys on watch in the dead of night in Afghanistan. He told her about the mountains that cut the sky into jagged pieces. He told her about the suffocating heat and the bone-chilling cold. He told her about men who were braver than anyone he'd ever known. He wasn't sure why he did it. Maybe it was to keep her calm. Maybe it was to keep himself calm. On the 3rd day, something shifted. As he knelt beside her with the warm bottle, she didn't turn her head away. She nuzzled the nipple, and then she began to drink. Not just a sip, but long, steady pulls. She drank until the bottle was empty, a drop of white milk clinging to her muzzle. Hank felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost knocked him over. He wiped the milk away with his thumb. "There you go, girl," he whispered. "There you go." From that day on, Astra started to rally. She learned the sound of the tin can being scraped, the sign that food was coming. Her wobbly legs grew stronger. She started to explore the small camper, her nose twitching, her ears swiveling. creating a map of her world through sound and smell. She learned the crunch of Hank's boots on the gravel outside. She learned the exact timbre of his voice. She learned the scent of him, a mixture of desert dust, motor oil, and something else, something like safety. One afternoon, he came back from a scrap run to find her standing, waiting for him. When he stepped inside, she took 2 shaky steps toward him and bumped his hand with her nose. He knew then. She had built a map, and he was the center of it. She couldn't see him, but she saw him. Their days fell into a simple, quiet rhythm. Morning feedings, slow, careful walks around the small lot, Hank's hand on her halter, guiding her around obstacles, evening brushings with a piece of old burlap, and at night, the stories. Hank found himself sleeping deeper. The nightmares that had plagued him for years began to recede, like a tide going out. The emptiness that had filled his days was replaced by a sense of purpose so profound it was almost physical. He wasn't just a scavenger anymore. He was a caretaker, a guardian. He was happy. It was a strange, unfamiliar feeling, and it scared him a little. Then, one night, the desert decided to remind him just how fragile everything was. It came on without warning, a searing heat that started deep in his chest, a throbbing headache that felt like a drill boring into his skull. He woke up sometime after midnight, his body drenched in sweat, his lungs on fire. He tried to stand, thinking only of Astra's next feeding, but the world tilted violently. His knees gave out, and he crashed to the floor. The oil lamp swayed, casting dizzying, distorted shadows on the walls. He tried to call out, but his throat was raw, and only a choked gasp escaped. From her corner, Astra stirred. She let out a low, questioning nicker. When Hank didn't answer, her call became sharper, more urgent. She knew something was wrong. Her human, the center of her dark world, was down. She scrambled to her feet and began to stomp, her small hooves thudding against the plywood floor. It wasn't enough. She moved to the camper door, a thin sheet of metal, and began to strike it with her front hoof. Clang, clang, clang. The sound, sharp and rhythmic, shattered the desert silence. Hank lay on the floor, his breathing shallow, the edges of his vision closing in. He could hear her, but the sound was distant, as if coming from the end of a long tunnel. Clang, clang, clang. She didn't stop. She was calling for help in the only way she knew how. Across the lot, Marie Thompson shot up in bed. "Bill, get up! That's coming from Hank's place!" Bill was in his boots and jeans in seconds, a heavy flashlight in his hand. He ran across the lot, the beam bouncing wildly. He found Astra, frantic, still kicking the door, her eyes wide with a fear she couldn't see but could feel in every fiber of her being. Bill ripped the door open. Astra spun toward him, a sound of relief escaping her. And then Bill saw him. Hank, crumpled on the floor, his face flushed a dangerous red, his breathing ragged. "Marie!" he bellowed. "Call Doc Shepler, now!" They bundled Hank into the back of their pickup truck. As they sped away, Astra's frantic, frightened whinnies followed them into the night. Hank was diagnosed with a severe case of pneumonia. "Another few hours and you'd have been a goner," the doctor told him grimly. "Whatever was making all that racket, it saved your life." 3 days later, Bill drove him back to the lot. Hank was weak, unsteady, a paper bag of antibiotics clutched in his hand. He stepped out of the truck, and before he could even take a full breath, the camper door creaked open. Astra was standing right there, as if she hadn't moved since he'd left. Her ears snapped forward. He whispered her name. "Astra." She answered with a deep, throaty nicker and half ran, half stumbled to him, burying her head in his chest. He dropped the bag of medicine and wrapped his arms around her neck, holding on like he was drowning. "You saved me, girl," he choked out, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved me." She just breathed against him, a steady, warm presence in the twilight. In that moment, Hank understood. He hadn't just rescued her from the desert. They had rescued each other. She had pulled him from a darkness far deeper and more dangerous than the one she lived in every day. But what neither of them knew was that Astra's desperate, life-saving alarm had been heard by more than just Marie and Bill. A young woman, a photography student working on a project about life on the fringes of society, had been camped out nearby, drawn by the stark beauty of the desert night, and her camera had been rolling. The story of the blind foal who saved the lonely veteran was about to go viral, and it was going to bring a monster right to their doorstep. Rosa Delgado was a storyteller. She just used a camera instead of words. The 21-year-old communications student was fascinated by the forgotten corners of the world, the stories that existed in the rust and the dust. That night, she hadn't been looking for a hero. She'd just been trying to capture the lonely beauty of the desert. But the sound of a horse kicking a metal door, followed by the frantic shouts and the screech of tires, had pulled her from her work. She filmed it all, a shaky, raw piece of footage captured from a distance. She didn't know what it meant, but she knew it was a story. The next day, she went back. She found the camper, the old truck, and a quiet, weathered man brushing the coat of a small, gray, blind foal. She introduced herself, explained what she'd seen. Hank, wary of strangers, was hesitant, but when Rosa showed him the short, powerful clip of Astra saving his life, he saw not an invasion of privacy, but a testament to the incredible spirit of the animal he loved. He told her the whole story, the discovery in the dark, the fight to keep her alive, the bond they'd formed. Rosa was captivated. That evening, she edited the footage. She added a few simple lines of text, explaining the story of the veteran and the blind foal who had become his eyes and ears, who had saved his life. She chose a piece of simple, emotional music, and she posted it online with a simple caption. Sometimes, the most broken things save us. This is Hank and Astra. She tagged a few local news outlets and animal rescue pages. She didn't expect much. She went to bed. When she woke up, her phone had exploded. The video hadn't just gotten a few likes. It had been shared thousands of times. By morning, it was tens of thousands. By noon, it was hundreds of thousands. The story of Hank and Astra had struck a chord. People were tired of bad news, of division, of cynicism. This simple story of compassion and loyalty was a drink of cool water in a thirsty world. Comments poured in from all over the globe. This man is a true hero. I'm crying. What a beautiful bond. How can we help them? A national animal welfare blogger with millions of followers shared the video. This is what humanity should look like, she wrote. Let's find this man and give him the world. Someone started a GoFundMe page. The initial goal was $5,000, enough to buy hay, feed, and maybe build a more stable shelter for Astra. It hit the goal in an hour. By the end of the day, it was at $50,000. By the end of the week, it had surpassed $250,000, with donations pouring in from every state and dozens of countries. Hank Cooper, the Invisible Man, was suddenly the most famous man in Benson, Arizona. He was bewildered by the attention. People started showing up at his small lot. A local farmer dropped off a truckload of the finest alfalfa hay. The owner of the town's feed co-op delivered a year's supply of high-quality pellets. Marie and Bill helped him organize the donations, their faces beaming with pride. A local construction company volunteered to build a proper, sturdy corral and a 3-sided shelter for Astra, complete with a rubber-matted floor. Hank, who had spent years making do with nothing, was overwhelmed. I don't understand, he said to Rosa, watching a team of volunteers put up the fence posts. Why do they care so much? Because you did, Rosa said simply. You cared when no one was watching, Hank. In a world where everyone is performing, you were just real. People are desperate for that. The story was everywhere. Local news, national news, morning talk shows. The image of the grizzled veteran and his blind horse became a symbol of hope. Hank, with Rosa's help, gave one simple interview. He talked about Astra, about her courage, about how she'd taught him to see the world differently. He never once mentioned where she had come from. He didn't want any trouble. But in a high-rise office in Las Vegas, a world away from the dust of Benson, Trevor Langston was watching. He wasn't watching a heartwarming story. He was watching a public relations nightmare unfold on a massive, wall-mounted screen. His assistant, a nervous young woman named Jenna, stood beside him, tablet in hand. "The video has passed 50 million views across all platforms," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The fundraiser is approaching $300,000. Trevor's face was a mask of cold fury. He watched the clip of Hank gently brushing Astra's mane. He saw the trust in the animal, the love in the man's eyes, and all he felt was rage. "A defective," he hissed, the words like chips of ice. "A piece of refuse I ordered destroyed is now an international celebrity." He looked at the comments flashing on the screen. People were calling Hank a hero. They were calling Astra a miracle. And in the threads, a question was starting to pop up more and more frequently. Where did this beautiful foal come from? Who would ever abandon such a creature? "They're digging," Jenna said, her voice trembling slightly. "Animal rights groups are starting to ask questions. They're trying to trace her origins." Trevor Langston had built his empire on an image of perfection. Langston horses were flawless. They were champions. The idea that one of his, a defective one, was now the poster child for abandoned animals was an intolerable stain on his brand. It was a loose thread that could unravel everything. He turned to his assistant, his eyes cold and dead. "Get our legal team on the phone, now." Jenna swallowed. "Sir, the public opinion is—" "I don't care about public opinion," he snapped. "I care about my property. That foal is a Langston thoroughbred. It has a registration number. It has a brand, even if it's invisible. It belongs to me." He pointed a finger at the screen, at the image of Hank and Astra standing in the golden light of the setting sun. "I want her back. And I want that old man ruined. Make the call." A black SUV, sleek and silent as a shark, rolled onto the dusty lot 3 days later. A man in a perfectly tailored $1,000 suit stepped out, his polished shoes crunching on the gravel. He carried a leather briefcase that cost more than Hank's truck. Hank was showing Astra her new water trough, a gift from a donor in Ohio. He looked up, his hand resting on Astra's neck. "Mr. Hank Cooper?" the lawyer said, his voice smooth and cold. "My name is Daniel Klein. I represent Langston Racing." Hank's blood ran cold. He didn't know the name, but he knew the type. This was trouble. Klein didn't waste time with pleasantries. He opened his briefcase and produced a thick sheaf of documents. "We are here to reclaim property belonging to my client, specifically a gray filly, registered name Oro's Constellation, stable name Astra." Hank felt the world shift under his feet. He stared at the lawyer, his mind reeling. Langston Racing, the name of the biggest, most powerful racing stable in the country. The place was a fortress. How could Astra have come from there? Then the pieces clicked into place. The quality of her build, even as a foal. The way she was found, dumped like trash, but not injured by an accident. It hadn't been a random act of cruelty. It had been a corporate decision. "She was left in the desert to die," Hank said, his voice a low growl. The lawyer didn't blink. "There are protocols for decommissioning assets. Your possession of the animal was not, and is not, authorized. She is the property of Trevor Langston." He extended a crisp legal notice. "You have 72 hours to return the horse. If you fail to comply, we will seek immediate legal action for theft, and we will sue you for damages related to the unauthorized use of our brand's genetic material for financial gain." The threat hung in the air, venomous and clear. They weren't just going to take Astra. They were going to destroy him. They were going to use the GoFundMe, the very thing that had given them hope, as a weapon to paint him as a grifter and a thief. Hank looked from the lawyer's merciless face to Astra, who had pressed close to his side, sensing the tension in the air. That old cold rage he'd felt the night he found her came roaring back to life, hot and clean. He looked Daniel Klein dead in the eye. "She isn't property," he said, his voice shaking with a quiet fury. "She's family. You tell your boss he's not getting her back." The lawyer's lips curled into a faint, knowing smirk. "We'll see you in court, Mr. Cooper." He slid back into the SUV and was gone, leaving a cloud of dust and the heavy weight of his threat behind. Hank stood there, his arm draped protectively over Astra's back, the world's goodwill and $250,000 suddenly feeling like nothing at all against the crushing power of a ruthless billionaire who was used to getting exactly what he wanted. The fight for Astra's life was on. And Hank was terrifyingly outmatched. But Trevor Langston had made one critical mistake. He thought this was a fight about a horse. He was about to find out it was a fight about the soul of a community. And that was a war he was not prepared to win. The news of Langston's legal threat hit the town of Benson like a spark in a dry field. Rosa posted an update immediately. "They found us. The man who ordered Astra to be left for dead wants her back, and he's trying to ruin the veteran who saved her." The internet erupted. If the first video had been a wave of heartwarming support, this was a tsunami of righteous fury. The hashtag "I'd stand with Hank" went viral worldwide within hours. The story changed. It was no longer just a sweet tale of rescue. It was a David and Goliath battle. A blue-collar veteran and a blind horse against a heartless billionaire. Langston Racing's social media pages were flooded with tens of thousands of angry comments. Their corporate phone lines were jammed. Sponsors started getting nervous calls from customers. A boycott movement, to boycott Langston, began to trend. Prominent animal rights organizations, who had been quietly investigating, now went public, condemning Langston's actions and calling for a full investigation into his stable's disposal practices. Trevor Langston had wanted to quietly erase a problem. Instead, he had put a global spotlight on it. And on himself. He was furious. "I don't care," he roared at his PR team over a conference call. "Double down, release a statement, paint him as an unstable, opportunistic thief who stole my property and exploited a disabled animal for money. I want to own the narrative." His legal team filed an emergency injunction in court, demanding the immediate seizure of Astra. A court date was set. It was happening. But something else was happening too. In Benson, the community was mobilizing. This wasn't just Hank's fight anymore. It was theirs. Bill and Marie organized a town hall meeting. The small community center was packed to the rafters. Farmers, mechanics, teachers, shop owners, everyone was there. "This ain't right," Bill said, his voice booming through the crowded room. "Hank Cooper is one of us. That horse is one of us. We're not going to let some rich bully from Vegas come in here and push us around." A local lawyer, a woman who usually handled wills and property disputes, stood up. "I'll represent Hank pro bono," she announced to a roar of applause. "They want a fight? We'll give them one." The GoFundMe, which had slowed down, surged again. The new goal wasn't just for hay, it was for a legal defense fund. It shot past $500,000 overnight. The story had a new, powerful hook. A community standing up to a corporate giant. But Hank was terrified. He wasn't a public figure. He was a quiet man who liked to be left alone. The thought of a courtroom, of being cross-examined by high-priced lawyers, of having his life picked apart, was a nightmare. He almost buckled. "Maybe I should just give her back," he whispered to Rosa one night, his face buried in his hands. I can't put her through this, or this town." "Hank, look at me," Rosa said, her voice firm. "They aren't doing this for you. They're doing this with you. You showed them what decency looks like. Now they're just reflecting it back. You can't quit on them. You can't quit on her." Astra, standing nearby, seemed to sense his distress. She walked over and rested her head on his shoulder, a silent, solid weight of support. He took a deep breath. She was right. This was bigger than him now. But just when they thought the battle lines were clearly drawn, a new, shocking twist emerged. One that would change everything. A young woman, an intern at the very law firm representing Trevor Langston, had been tasked with digging up dirt on Hank Cooper. She was combing through his military records, his credit history, anything they could use to discredit him. As she stared at his file, at his date of birth, at the faded photograph, a cold dread washed over her. She knew this man. Her hands shaking, she pulled an old, worn photograph from her wallet, a picture of a much younger man in uniform, holding a little girl with pigtails on his shoulders. The man in the military file and the man in the photograph were the same. Hank Cooper was her father. Ellie hadn't seen him in over a decade. After a bitter falling out when she was a teenager, he had drifted away, becoming one of the ghosts she tried not to think about. She had no idea where he was or what had become of him. Until now. Her father was the man her firm, her boss, was about to publicly and brutally destroy. She was faced with an impossible choice. Stay silent, protect her burgeoning career, and watch her father be torn apart? Or risk everything, her job, her future, to help the father who had abandoned her and a horse she had never met? She printed out a single, crucial document from Langston's private files. It was a veterinary report on Astra's sire, Langston's most valuable stallion, a multi-million-dollar champion named Golden Eclipse. The report was heavily coded, but Ellie, who had a sharp mind, saw what it was trying to hide. A recessive genetic marker, a marker for congenital blindness. This wasn't about a single defective foal. Langston wasn't trying to protect his brand from one embarrassing story. He was trying to cover up a massive genetic scandal that could invalidate the bloodline of his prize stallion and cost him hundreds of millions of dollars. Astra wasn't just an inconvenience. She was living proof of his fraud. And that's why he didn't just want her back. He needed her to disappear. Permanently. Ellie slipped the document into her bag. That night, she drove from Las Vegas to Benson under the cover of darkness. She found the small lot, the new corral, the camper shell that broke her heart. She found her father older, grayer, more weathered than she remembered, standing under the stars, talking softly to a blind horse. "Dad?" she said, her voice cracking. Hank spun around. His face went pale. For a moment, he looked like he'd seen a ghost. "Ellie?" The day of the court hearing, the small town of Benson looked like it was preparing for a festival. Banners hanging from lampposts read, "We stand with Hank." Local diners offered a free coffee to anyone wearing a Save Astra pin. The courthouse lawn was filled with a peaceful but determined crowd of supporters, their presence a silent testimony. Inside, the courtroom was tense. Trevor Langston sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by his team of lawyers, looking bored and confident. He expected this to be a formality. Hank sat at the defense table with his volunteer lawyer, his daughter Ellie sitting right behind him. He looked terrified, but resolute. Langston's lawyer, Daniel Klein, was slick and merciless. He painted Hank as a mentally unstable vagrant who had stolen a valuable piece of livestock and was now exploiting it for public donations. He presented ownership papers, breeding records, a mountain of legal documents. "The law is simple, Your Honor," Klein concluded. "The horse is my client's property. Mr. Cooper is in possession of stolen goods." When it was the defense's turn, their lawyer was calm and methodical. She presented witness testimony from Miguel, the groom, who had been anonymously contacted by Ellie and agreed to testify about the "get rid of it" order. She presented Rosa's video of Astra saving Hank's life, proving the depth of their bond. But the killing blow came when she called her final witness. The defense calls Dr. Alistair Finch to the stand. A distinguished, elderly veterinarian with a shock of white hair took the stand. He was one of the most respected equine geneticists in the world. "Dr. Finch," the lawyer began, "have you had a chance to examine the genetic profile of the horse known as Astra?" "I have," he said, his voice clear and authoritative. And have you had a chance to examine the genetic profile of the Langston stallion Golden Eclipse? Klein shot to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. Relevance? It is entirely relevant, Your Honor, Hank's lawyer countered, as it pertains to motive. The judge waved Klein down. I'll allow it. Proceed. Dr. Finch, she continued, what did you find? Dr. Finch put on his glasses and looked directly at the judge. I found that Golden Eclipse is a carrier for a rare genetic defect known as Leber's congenital amaurosis, a condition that results in blindness from birth. It is a recessive trait. The filly, Astra, inherited the gene from both her sire and her dam, resulting in her condition. She is, in fact, undeniable proof that Mr. Langston's prize-winning multi-million-dollar stallion carries a catastrophic genetic flaw. A gasp went through the courtroom. Trevor Langston's face, for the first time, lost its composure. He went white as a sheet. And what would be the implications of this, Doctor? The implications would be financial ruin, Dr. Finch said bluntly. Every foal sired by Golden Eclipse would have to be tested. His breeding fees, which are astronomical, would plummet. It would be a scandal of epic proportions in the thoroughbred world. It would be motive, he finished, looking directly at Trevor Langston, for wanting to make sure any evidence of this defect disappeared. It was over. The legal argument about property was shattered by the reveal of a massive, deliberate fraud. The judge looked at Trevor Langston with undisguised contempt. Mr. Langston, this court has heard testimony that you ordered a newborn foal to be gotten rid of because it was blind. It now appears your motive was not to cull a defective animal, but to destroy the evidence of your own multi-million-dollar deception. He banged his gavel, the sound cracking like a gunshot in the silent room. Injunction denied. Under the state's animal cruelty and abandonment statutes, your claim of ownership is hereby terminated. Full and permanent custody of the horse known as Astra is awarded to Mr. Hank Cooper. The courtroom erupted. The crowd outside, hearing the cheers, roared its approval. Hank sat stunned, tears streaming down his face. Ellie put her arms around him from behind, her own tears falling onto his shoulder. He reached up and held her hand, a silent acknowledgement of all the lost years, and the miracle of a second chance. Trevor Langston and his legal team stormed out of the courthouse, their faces like thunder, hounded by a sudden swarm of reporters asking questions about Golden Eclipse. His reputation was in tatters. His empire was about to crumble. Justice had been served. That evening, back at the lot, a quiet celebration was held. The whole town seemed to be there, bringing covered dishes and sharing stories. Astra stood calmly in the middle of it all, a gentle, quiet queen, accepting pats and praise. Hank stood with his arm around his daughter, watching the scene. I never thought I'd see you again, he said, his voice thick. Me neither, Dad, Ellie said, leaning her head on his shoulder. I guess we both got a little lost. Looks like a blind horse had to show us the way home. A few weeks later, an offer came. It was from a renowned equine therapy center in Texas called Crescent Ridge. They worked with veterans suffering from PTSD and children with special needs. They had followed the story, and they wanted to hire Hank as an animal care specialist, and they wanted Astra to be their lead therapy animal. They offered him a small house on the property, a steady salary, and a purpose-driven life for both of them. This time, Hank didn't hesitate. He said yes. Their departure from Benson was another town-wide event. A banner hung across Main Street. Thank you, Hank and Astra. You showed us how to fight. As Hank drove the old Sierra out of town, with Astra safe in a comfortable trailer behind him and Ellie in the passenger seat, he knew he wasn't leaving anything behind. He was taking it all with him: the love of a community, the forgiveness of his daughter, and the unwavering trust of a blind horse who had taught him how to see again. They had started in darkness, two broken souls discarded by the world. But together, they had found the light. And now, they were going to spend the rest of their lives sharing it. What an incredible journey. From a death sentence in the dark to a new life full of purpose and love, Hank and Astra prove that every life has value, and that compassion is the most powerful force on Earth. If their story touched your heart, please show your support by hitting that like button and sharing this video with someone who needs a little hope today. And don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss another story that matters. Your support helps us keep sharing these incredible tales. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.